I love seeing how people who sew can look at fabrics, notions, or techniques in a whole new way. Extraordinary projects usually begin with familiar materials, and the result is something new and different that often surprises and amazes us. I'm so glad that you have joined me and my friends today because we have wonderful ideas for creatively using interesting techniques. Today is a special day, so let's not let another minute slip by. Welcome to my sewing room. I am so happy to have as my guest today my very dear friend Louise Cutting. Louise is representing Rowenta Irons. Louise, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Martha. Today I'm going to test your mettle. I know you love fine sewing. This is deconstruction.
Deconstruction.
Yes. Deconstruction's been around for 10 years, but the top designers have started to work with deconstruction. We would have all failed our junior high sewing classes if we ever turned anything in like this. But now that the top designers are doing it, it's all right. You can do deconstruction on just about any portion of the garment. What I've done here is it is the outside edge of the front of a jacket. Now it's easier to do is if you're doing it on curves rather than squares. So I have curved off the front coming around from the lapel, down around the curve of the bottom, and you would just continue around the bottom. What you have is about an inch wide piece of bias. I've put the double-sided fusing tape right in the middle of it. You don't have to worry about your raw edges. You can overlap them. There are no seam allowances, so that's been cut off. I've already fused on one side. I've pulled the paper off and I've fused to one side, and I am now fusing to the other side. So coming around here, it's been fused on both sides. You don't have to worry about it moving because it is bias. Now you can just go ahead and stitch pretty much right through the middle. This is going to be the tough part. You use a very wicked tool. This is a metal brush. You can use a fingernail brush. I've seen this done on linen. I've seen it done on the silk charmeuse. I've started working here, but you start working with it as hard as possible, and then take your steam iron, get a good head of steam out, and start steaming it into place. The jackets like this will sell for over $4,000.
Okay, now had you cut it? You're just tearing up that bias.
It's just tearing up the bias.
No clips at all.
Nope, none whatsoever. It is on one side and on the other. And when the lapel is rolled back, you now have the bias on both sides.
Oh,
it's been double stitched through the middle so that this won't roll completely up. So this would be around the top of the jacket, the outside edge. Here is deconstruction done around the outside edge of the neckline. Now your seam allowance is left on this one. And what will happen on the wrong side, the bias is put on the wrong side and you are clipping just your bias, or excuse me, just your garment. You're not clipping the bias. It is then pressed into one direction, and here is, and this is a secret, the bias has been trimmed away and your clips are done on the bias on your actual garment. It will allow your garment to open up so much easier. So on the front side, this is turned. Now you have two layers of the raw edge and they're steamed into place. If deconstruction goes out of fashion, you take all that off and put on a conventional bias binding. When I was snoop shopping last week, I always look for some new things dealing with deconstruction.
Now, did you say snoop shopping?
Yes.
Tell us what that means.
That means you don't buy it and take it home, copy it and take it back. You literally are standing in the dressing room figuring out what they've done.
I love it. I love it.
So my Snoop shopping, I was looking at a $900 shell for a blouse.
Ooh.
And again, normally there would have been bias binding put on the bottom, but he did just raw edges. Now what happened was there was no hem. The inch wide of bias was placed along the bottom, and it was pressed into the final position.
The double bias, I mean, two layers. Okay.
2 layers of bias.
Okay.
And the 1 layer of your fashion fabric.
Okay.
Now, if you wanted it to be all even, which generally I will make my bias bind just a little wider, and I will go back in and then use a rotary cutter to clean finish. Now here is the bias binding pressed into final position. I used my little tool and I brushed it so that it would start to bloom along the bottom. And here is your raw edge at the bottom, the 2 layers of bias, and I did another one almost tone on tone, and that's what I saw on the shell. It was exactly the same colors. Again, if it isn't in fashion anymore, the bottom can come off and you can put a pretty bias binding the way you conventionally used to sew it.
And he left it raw.
He left it raw.
So it will ravel.
It will
dry
ravel.
Cleaned, worn, or washed.
And as I saw a lady on an airplane with an extremely expensive designer coat, I just keep on cutting all these little edges as they start to ravel. She said, I clean finish my coat every time I put it on.
So she just keeps raveling her coat.
Yes, yes.
Oh, Louise, this is just fascinating. Your deconstruction techniques.
Yes, this
Thank
is
you
deconstruction.
so very
You're
much.
welcome.
And next I have some doll dressing ideas for you. My little doll loves her pinafore that has scalloped lace. Scalloped lace is really very easy to do. Let me just show you how pretty it is. This little doll, this is Joanna, and she has on a wonderful little dress out of her Christmas dress out of red and green plaid. The sweetest little pinafore you've ever seen with the French laces and the entredeaux. And what I absolutely love is the scalloped beading here. You curve your lace on the bottom and go up in miter at the corners. And by the way, you can use either a large needle to do your pin stitch or a wing needle. I'm going to show you the scalloping also on the little dress that is just as pretty as on the pinafore. I just simply love scallop lace. It's actually called curving and mitering, and the secret is that it's very easy to do. I'm going to show you first the pinned method of curving lace and scalloping, and then I'm going to show you the no pin way. All right, you have to have a board to stick your pins in. I've already come around. You pin on the bottom. Now let me show you. Trace off the pattern, by the way. You trace your scallop and you trace your miter lines. Okay, I've come around the curve and I'm up in the curve, so I'm going to put a pin at the top of the miter line I have already drawn. I'm going to fold the lace back on itself and remove the pin that is at the bottom, put it right back in place, and a perfect miter is folded into place. Now I'm going to come along. When I do lace shaping, I pull the lace just a little bit, just a hair. Don't pull it too tightly, but don't leave it really, really loose either. And I put the pins on the bottom, and then I've drawn with the water-soluble pin, and then I'm going to come around, and it's very important to always use glass head pins. Now what am I going to do about this little curve in here? French lace has gathering threads built into the French lace. The one that is the easiest to pull makes a scallop on the top. There are 3 or 4 lace threads actually gathered in. All right, I have pulled that lace. I've pulled that little fluffiness out. I've made it nice and flat on the board, and now I'm going to give it a shot of steam. And you know why I'm using glass head pins? You probably have figured it out, because if I don't use glass head pins, they will melt. But anyway, I spray it down, and now then this shows you the pinless method. When you're going to do pinless, you simply come along, you trace it off, and I do use a water-soluble stabilizer behind this, and I straight stitch along the bottom. Then I go back after straight stitching, and you have to fold in those miters, by the way. When you come in, when you're straight stitching, you stop and kind of pinch those miters in. Then I come and pull the threads, as you see here, make it lay flat. I still got to pull the thread on this one, and then I come back and do my wing needle pin stitching. Now I am going to show you this beautiful wing needle pin stitch, which is our Madeira applique stitch, or it's also called a Point de Paris stitch, but actually it's a pin stitch or a Madeira applique stitch, and I personally love to use a wing needle for this because I love that look of wing needlework. However, if you want to use a very large universal needle or a jeans needle, which are kind of bigger needles, you can make it look a little more like hand pin stitching by using a very small needle. Now I have the water-soluble stabilizer right underneath here. I don't know whether you can see that, but I do have the water-soluble stabilizer underneath there because I really don't want to use a tearaway because it would just not be as pretty when I tore it away. And also it's a little stiffer, so I like to just dip it in water and get rid of it. Now here you can see I have done the wing needle pin stitch or Madeira applique or Point de Paris, whatever you want to call it. I've done this, and you know what? Let me go back. If you just have a sewing machine with straight and zigzag, you can always just use zigzag. I don't mean to indicate that to do beautiful lace shaping you have to have a Point de Paris or a wing needle entredot stitch in your sewing machine, because you don't. You can just simply do a zigzag and it's absolutely beautiful. Okay, we've done the Point de Paris on one side, the Point de Paris on the other side, and now all we'll do is just simply dip it and wash away this wonderful wash away, kind of thick stabilizer. I do like the wash away that's kind of thick when I'm going to do wing needlework. Now come back over and let's look at this doll's dress one more time just to see how perfectly beautiful this scalloping is. We're going to have the scallops that go along the edge all the way around, and then she has her shadow applique here, and the beautiful little scallop that is on her dress absolutely finishes off the lace shaping. Once again, this technique takes two forms of lace shaping. The first is curving and the second is mitering, and actually there's just one more technique for lace shaping. It's called flip-flopping, which you use for bows. Those are the only three techniques for lace shaping, which makes it so easy. And next I have some sewing inspirations to share with you. I am so pleased to have as my guest today Amelia Johanson. Amelia is Associate Editor of So Beautiful magazine. Amelia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. One of the things that Martha asked me to talk about today was infusing heirloom touches into women's apparel. And we've done this in the magazine quite a bit lately because their children grow. I have boys, they're not wearing smocking anymore at 16 and 14. And so we have to find ways to use lace, and because we love to use it. We want to sew, we want to work it into our wardrobe. And we were lucky the past couple of seasons because it's been used in fashion by designers. Ready-to-wear designers have used a lace a lot, and they've used a lot of heirloom techniques. And this is one we want to show you today. This is a keyhole opening, again, a look that you're seeing a lot in fashion. They were showing bellies for a long time, you know that, and now they're moving the attention up to the neckline, and this is one of the techniques that you're seeing a lot of. We made this technique the first time, and it ended up with a raw edge on the inside, which is okay. No one really sees you wearing your garments inside out, but as sewers, we want everything finished. So we found a better way to do it. So I will give you this.
Is this silk charmeuse?
That is silk charmeuse and so French laces. And I'm going to explain this on linen because we have linen as our sample fabric. So you're going to use different materials if you use silk. This is a water-soluble pencil that we used here. If you use silk, you're going to use an air-erasable pencil because you don't want to put water on your silk. First thing to do is to trace your keyhole opening on your fabric fold. This is the center of your blouse or top. And then you're going to take a wash away basting thread, which on silk we can steam it away with enough steam of a steam iron. And you're going to stitch on that line here. You're going to clip your curves, and we can continue. You're going to clip all the way around this curve here and clip each area. Then you're going to take your iron, and this is going to be the wrong side of the garment. You were originally working with your wrong sides together. Here we have the wrong sides turned to this side. And you're going to take your iron, and your seam line was right here. And if you steam it with a pretty heavy steam on your iron, that basting thread is going to disappear. And when you pull it back open, your seams are going to pull apart. Here we have one right here which pulls apart. Then you have a nice flat line here, and you can even trim it if you want, if you don't press it down even to a smaller seam, but you need an edge there that you're going to fold. So then you have flat on the back side, a nice flat edge, and then your seam allowance on the right side. Your next step is to take your lace, as you would shape for heirloom, pull the inside thread and pin so it works around that edge, and the very edge of your beading is going to run along the edge of your turned back edge. Zigzag it just directly over that edge, right on the edge, so you're just going to catch the very edge, and it applies the lace and it covers up the raw edge from the previous step. And here we have it in silk, and it shows the finished edge here and the finished edge on the inside, and you've got both zigzag, and there's your keyhole opening.
Amelia, that is so pretty, and I love your technique. You know, sometimes we call that magic Madeira, but I love the fact that you've used magic Madeira on that silk, on the keyhole, on a woman's garment. That is fabulous. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And next I have some hand embroidery to share with you. I'm so happy to have as my guest today Sandy Jenkins from Fredericksburg, Texas. Sandy has been sewing and designing and teaching needlework for over 28 years. Sandy has also studied at the Royal School of Needlework in London. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Martha. I love being here. I've decided today that I would like to give you a few free tips about beading. People sometimes have trouble beading because they can't get their beads to lay properly. I have a number of samples that I'm going to show you in just a minute, but I think I'll go ahead and start the beading. There are many, many kinds of beading threads and many kinds of beading needles. There are also many kinds of beads. Today we're going to be using seed beads. That's probably the most common that you can find readily at any store. When you string on beads, you come up and go through the bead, and if you have one, by the way, that won't go through, then just toss it and get a new one. Sometimes they aren't cut with the holes exactly the same size, so they don't go through readily, but we'll just consider that something as an experience, because it happens. I sometimes will string on 2 at a time. That's my most often asked question, but you know what? Don't string any more than that. You just lose control when you do it, and it's not a good idea. So I've got that one on, and I've got it on pretty tight. I'm using red thread today so you can kind of see it easier, but normally I would use the color of my material or the color of the bead. I then take on 2 more beads and go straight down right beside where I first started. I would string on 2 more, and I'm going to show you the little motion that I do. I butt my needle up against this last one and then pull that needle down so that they will lay perfectly intact. If you only have 1 bead, if you will sew it on with a little cross stitch, that sometimes works well and makes it hold real properly straight up. If you're beading in a track, and let me show you what a track is. This piece is a piece of machine embroidery. In fact, it's my second piece I've ever machine embroidered. I have that as a new skill. And I decided I wanted a little bit more dimension, Martha, a little bit more sparkle. So I have beaded all the paisleys. I left one unbeaded so that you could see what they look like without, if you didn't want the beads. But then I beaded the rest. And I used a jewel, a sew-on jewel at the bottom of it. I have a jewel today, and I will show you the back of it. They sew on in kind of a cross or an X. You'll come right through and lay your needle through that. I'm going to move this off. And you know, I think that I might just sew that on right on top of it. Well, I'll just not. Let me just come up and show you. not waste any time with that. You just go through one way and straight down. Make sure that's laying very flat, and then you come up and go through the other side, and it just makes it lay perfectly flat. I don't use anything, Martha, that's not sew on, because I do think that the glues that they're using, they're going to come out eventually. I want to show you one other, and we'll stop and show some models in just a second, but I want to show you one more stitch before we move on. It is a wrapped chain, and a chain stitch you can usually do with a thread that is, I'm going to use a larger thread, I believe. You can usually do it with a thread that's thick. If you plan on wrapping it like a braid, I'm going to use floss today just because it's the perfect thickness. And but you could use anything. You could use silk, wool, whatever. I'm going to come up and lay a few chain stitches just by coming in the hole. Regular, it's a lazy daisy actually, many of them. In the hole again, coming up just a bit, always in the loop, and try to hold a good tension. I'm going to stop right there and show you the second step of it so that I can take the time to show you some models. Today I've brought some chronic metallic. It's a really neat thread to make a cording look, and if you only wrap one stitch through each chain stitch, it just looks great for corded effect. And then I'm going to go down, and a lot of this looks really, really good. A really good example of that stitch is on the edge of this initial that I've done, the pink edge that has the white metallic wrapped. That is an example of it openly wrapped. I have another example. If you wrapped it closely together, it makes a more satin stitch look, or a padded satin like in the old days. I think that you will enjoy the use of this stitch, and you'll find many other uses for it also. Martha, could you show them the other examples I brought of beading?
This is so beautiful. This is that paisley machine embroidered alphabet again. And Sandy, I just think it's fabulous the way you've beaded the paisleys. Very formal and very beautiful on the velvet with the silk du peony. And I just absolutely am enchanted with the fact that you have done this cotton polka dotted garment bag. You've done the machine embroidery, and once again done the beading on top of the machine embroidery.
Martha, the young girls love beading. They
Oh,
love
heavens,
to glitch it up, and
yes,
how
yes.
much more perfect than to do it out of a modern fabric that the girls will just love.
Oh, this is
to
just
take to camp or wherever.
This would be the nicest camp bag in the
Perfect.
world. Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
And now I
Thank
have a
you.
beautiful piece of antique clothing to share with you from my vintage collection. This very special dress belongs to Jenny Adams Miller of Tuscaloosa. She has loaned it for me to share these beautiful ideas. The first thing I'm going to do is hold this yoke down to let you see that the yoke goes all the way from the back to the front with no shoulder seam. But look at this in the front. Here's a little tiny front yoke. This little piece is a separate piece. There's a little seam here and here. There's so much piping at the top, at the bottom of the yoke, all the way around the sleeves, all the way around the armholes. Now look at this sweet little embroidery on the sleeves. Isn't that sweet? 3 little rows of scallop stitching. I am completely enchanted by this dress. I'm going to show you the embroidery, but I want to show you there are no side seams on this dress. Absolutely fascinating. The embroidery is by hand, and it was done all the way around the dress. Absolutely no side seams in this dress. I'm going to hold this dress out so you can see this exquisite embroidery. It is absolutely beautiful. The embroidery and then the tucks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 tucks, and they're all done by hand, and the embroidery is all by hand. Now, if you will look at the bottom of the skirt, there's another row of this exquisite embroidery with a pretty wide hem that has been folded up. Once again, embroidery by hand, hem put in by hand, and lace at the bottom. Now, how do I know this embroidery is by hand? If you want to check to see whether embroidery is Swiss embroidered or by hand, you find 2 matching patterns and see if the threads go across at the same place or not at the same place. If they don't cross at the same place, then you know it's by hand. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today. I'd like to invite you back next time.